If you want a real breakthrough in 2026, don't start by adding more goals, more pressure, or more noise to your life. Start by eliminating what is poisoning your clarity. Growth does not begin with accumulation. It begins with renunciation. Many people fail not because they lack talent, intelligence, or opportunity, but because they cling to what no longer serves them. They hold on out of fear, habit, or emotional dependence, and that attachment quietly sabotages their future. If you want to move forward, there are 3 things you must let go of. Most people believe progress comes from adding more. More goals, more routines, more strategies, more pressure. They wake up each year thinking the answer is to do more, push harder, and carry heavier loads. But real growth doesn't begin that way. Growth begins the moment you have the courage to ask a quieter, more honest question: what no longer belongs in my life? Because you can't move forward if your hands are full of things that weigh you down. Every stage of life demands a form of letting go. What once protected you can later imprison you. What once motivated you can later exhaust you. And what once made sense can later become an obstacle. Yet many people resist elimination because it feels like loss. They fear that removing something, an idea, a habit, a relationship, a role, will leave them empty. But the truth is the opposite. Elimination creates space. And space is where clarity, energy, and direction are born. Think about how often you carry unnecessary emotional weight, obligations you accepted out of guilt, expectations you never questioned, commitments that no longer align with who you are, but you maintain them out of loyalty to an outdated version of yourself. This is not discipline, this is self-neglect disguised as responsibility. When your life is overcrowded, nothing moves. Everything becomes noise, and in noise, purpose cannot breathe. Elimination is not failure, it is refinement. It is the ability to say, this served me once, but it doesn't serve me now. That sentence alone requires maturity. Immature minds cling. Mature minds discern. They understand that life is dynamic, not static. What worked at 20 may suffocate you at 40. What kept you safe once may now keep you small. Growth requires the emotional intelligence to recognize when something has expired. Many people are exhausted not because they do too much, but because they do too much of what doesn't matter. They invest energy in conversations that drain them, routines that numb them, and ambitions that aren't truly theirs. They chase goals inherited from society, family, or fear, instead of choosing goals rooted in meaning. Elimination forces you to ask uncomfortable questions. Why am I doing this? Who am I trying to please? What am I afraid of losing if I let this go? Letting go is not an act of aggression, it is an act of self-respect. You are not rejecting life, you are choosing it more carefully. When you eliminate what is unnecessary, what remains becomes powerful. Focus sharpens. Motivation returns, decisions become simpler. You stop scattering your energy and start directing it. This is why clarity often feels like relief. Not because something new appeared, but because something heavy disappeared. There is also a hidden freedom in elimination. When you stop trying to keep everything, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop living in internal conflict. Your actions begin to align with your values, not your fears. You no longer need to justify why you are tired, frustrated, or unfulfilled, because you have removed the sources of that exhaustion. Peace is not found by adding calm practices to a chaotic life. It is found by removing chaos itself. To eliminate is to choose consciously. It means accepting that every yes is also a no. To something else, often to your own well-being. When you simplify your life, you don't lose opportunities, you gain direction. And direction is what turns effort into progress. Without it, even the hardest work leads nowhere. If you want a breakthrough in 2026, don't ask what more you can do. Ask what you are finally ready to release. Because the life that moves forward is not the one that carries everything, but the one that knows what to put down. One of the greatest obstacles to personal freedom is the belief that we need someone else to complete us. It often doesn't announce itself loudly. It hides behind phrases like "I can't live without you, I need you to be okay," or "if they leave, everything falls apart." This is emotional dependence, and although it can feel like love, it is actually fear wearing the mask of attachment. When your emotional stability is outsourced to another person, your life stops being yours. Emotional dependence teaches you to measure your worth through external validation. A message unanswered becomes a threat. A change in tone feels like rejection. You start reading signs that may not exist, trying to secure reassurance instead of cultivating inner strength. Over time, this dependence erodes your self-esteem. You stop asking what you want and begin focusing on what will keep the other person close. This is how people slowly abandon themselves without noticing. The most dangerous aspect of emotional dependence is not loneliness, it is the loss of dignity. When you fear abandonment more than self-betrayal, you tolerate what hurts you. You excuse disrespect, you normalize imbalance, you convince yourself that suffering is part of love, when in reality, suffering is often the cost of fear. Love that requires you to shrink, silence yourself, or endure constant anxiety is not love. It is survival behavior. True connection does not demand renunciation of the self. It is built on choice, not necessity. When two people choose each other freely, without emotional chains, the bond is stronger and healthier. But when one person needs the other to feel whole, the relationship becomes unequal. One gives up power, the other carries an invisible weight. Over time, resentment replaces affection, and dependence replaces desire. Emotional independence does not mean emotional coldness. It does not mean closing your heart or rejecting intimacy. It means understanding that your emotional center belongs to you. You can love deeply without losing yourself. You can be attached without being trapped. You can share your life without handing over your self-worth. This distinction changes everything. When you stop needing someone to survive emotionally, you start choosing them from a place of strength rather than fear. Many people stay in relationships long after they have expired, not because there is love, but because there is fear of emptiness. They ask themselves, "Who will I be without this person?" But that question is backwards. The real question is, who am I becoming by staying? Emotional dependence keeps you anchored to versions of yourself that no longer reflect your values. It delays growth. It postpones healing. It convinces you that loneliness is worse than losing yourself, when in fact losing yourself is the deepest form of loneliness. Learning to be alone without feeling empty is a profound act of maturity. Solitude, when chosen consciously, strengthens the relationship you have with yourself. It teaches you that your company is enough, that your thoughts do not need constant distraction, and that your emotions are manageable without external rescue. From this place, relationships stop being refuges and start becoming shared journeys. When you eliminate emotional dependence, something quiet but powerful happens. You stop negotiating your boundaries. You say what you feel without fear of losing everything. You accept that not everyone will stay, and that is not a catastrophe. You understand that rejection does not define your value, and abandonment does not erase your worth. This inner stability creates a natural filter. Those who can relate to you in freedom will stay. Those who need control will drift away. If you want a real breakthrough, you must stop asking others to carry the weight of your emotional life. No one can do that without breaking you or themselves. Strengthen your inner foundation, and relationships will no longer be cages. You will finally be able to walk beside someone, not behind them or beneath them. There's a subtle form of self-sabotage that doesn't feel destructive at all. In fact, it feels comforting, reasonable, even protective. It is the habit of lying to yourself just enough to avoid change. Self-deception rarely shouts, it whispers. It tells you that things aren't that bad, that you'll deal with it later, that this discomfort is normal and temporary. And while you wait, life quietly passes by. Self-deception is not ignorance. It is a choice Deep down, most people know when something isn't right. They feel it in their bodies, in their restlessness, in the quiet dissatisfaction that appears when distractions fade. But acknowledging the truth would require action, and action threatens the stability of what is familiar. So instead of confronting reality, people negotiate with it. They adjust expectations, lower standards, and call acceptance, when in truth it is resignation. One of the most common lies people tell themselves is that time will fix everything. Time fixes nothing on its own. Time only amplifies what you do or don't do. Avoided decisions don't disappear, they harden. Unspoken truths don't fade, they become distance. Unlived potential doesn't dissolve, it turns into regret. Self-deception allows you to delay discomfort today at the cost of deeper discomfort tomorrow. Another lie is the belief that endurance equals strength. Many people stay in situations that slowly erode them because they confuse tolerance with maturity. They tell themselves they are being patient, understanding, or loyal, when in reality they are afraid of the consequences of choosing differently. Endurance without purpose is not virtue, it is stagnation. Strength is not staying at any cost, it is knowing when staying costs you too much. Self-deception also distorts identity. Over time, you begin to adapt to a life that doesn't fit you. You become efficient at surviving in spaces that don't inspire you. You perform roles that drain you. You meet expectations that were never aligned with your nature. And because this adaptation happens gradually, you mistake familiarity for fulfillment. You forget what it felt like to want more, not in an ambitious way, but in an authentic one. The price of self-deception is paid in energy. When your outer life doesn't match your inner truth, everything becomes heavier. You feel tired even when you rest, unmotivated even when opportunities appear, disconnected even when surrounded by people. This exhaustion isn't physical, it's existential. It comes from constantly suppressing the voice that tells you something needs to change. Facing the truth doesn't mean acting impulsively or dramatically. It means being honest before being comfortable. It means admitting, without excuses, when something no longer works. It means asking yourself questions you've avoided. What am I afraid to admit? What am I pretending not to see? Who would I disappoint if I chose myself? These questions don't create chaos. They create clarity. And clarity is the beginning of movement. Truth has a reputation for being harsh, but it is only harsh when resisted. When accepted, it becomes grounding. It gives you a stable point from which to act. Once you stop lying to yourself, your decisions simplify. You no longer waste energy justifying your unhappiness. You stop hoping that external changes will compensate for internal dishonesty. You reclaim your authority over your own life. Self-respect grows in the presence of truth. Every time you acknowledge reality instead of avoiding it, you strengthen your inner alignment. You begin to trust yourself again. Not because everything is perfect, but because you know you won't abandon yourself for comfort. This trust is essential for any real breakthrough. Without it, every new goal rests on a fragile foundation. If you want your life to move forward, you must stop protecting illusions that keep you still. Progress begins the moment you choose truth over convenience and clarity over comfort. Most people don't feel stuck because they lack ability or opportunity. They feel stuck because their minds are crowded. When everything inside you is loud, opinions, fears, expectations, unfinished thoughts, it becomes almost impossible to move with direction. You may be busy, even productive, yet internally lost. This is where clarity becomes essential, not as a luxury but as a necessity for movement. Clarity is often misunderstood as certainty. People why? They feel completely sure before acting, believing that clarity will arrive like a perfect plan or a detailed map. But clarity doesn't come from knowing every step, it comes from knowing what matters and what doesn't. It is the ability to distinguish between noise and truth, between urgency and importance. Without this distinction, effort becomes scattered, and scattered effort rarely produces meaningful change. When you are unclear, everything feels equally heavy. Small decisions exhaust you. You overthink conversations, delay choices, and replay scenarios that lead nowhere. This mental congestion creates the illusion that you're being careful, when in reality, you are immobilized. Clarity cuts through this fog. It doesn't eliminate complexity, but it organizes it. It gives your energy a direction, and direction is what turns intention into action. Clarity is born from honesty and elimination. When you remove what doesn't align with your values, unnecessary commitments, emotional dependencies, self-deception, you naturally begin to see more clearly. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is consistent with who I am?" This shift changes everything. Decisions become less about approval and more about coherence. You are no longer pulled in multiple directions because your inner compass is active. Movement doesn't require dramatic confidence. It requires enough clarity to take the next step. Many people remain paralyzed not because they don't know what to do, but because they try to resolve everything at once. Clarity simplifies the horizon. It narrows your focus to what is essential now. When you know what deserves your attention, you stop wasting energy on what doesn't. This conservation of energy creates momentum, and momentum creates confidence. There is also emotional clarity, the understanding of what you feel and why. When emotions are undefined, they control you. You react instead of respond. You confuse anxiety with intuition, attachment with love, fear with caution. Emotional clarity allows you to name your experience without judgment. And once something is named, it becomes manageable. You can work with it instead of being ruled by it. Clarity is not about perfection, it is about alignment. You can feel afraid and still be clear. You can feel uncertain and still move forward. What matters is that your actions reflect your values rather than your impulses. When your inner world is aligned, even difficult choices feel lighter because they make sense. You stop questioning yourself endlessly. And this inner stability is what allows consistent action. One of the greatest sources of clarity is silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of unnecessary input. When you reduce external noise, constant opinions, comparisons, distractions, you create space to hear your own thoughts. In that space, priorities emerge naturally. You remember what you care about. You reconnect with your intuition, not as something mystical, but as accumulated self-knowledge. Movement follows clarity the way breath follows space. When there is room to move, movement becomes natural. You don't force it, you allow it. And each step taken from clarity reinforces it. Action confirms understanding. This is how progress builds, quietly, steadily, without drama. If you want your life to move forward, stop waiting for certainty and start cultivating clarity. Because clarity is what turns intention into motion. Fear is often mistaken for wisdom. It disguises itself as caution, responsibility, or realism, and because of that, it rarely gets questioned. People say they're being sensible, waiting for the right moment, protecting what they have, but underneath those explanations, fear quietly dictates their choices. Not the fear that keeps you safe from real danger, but the fear that keeps you small, predictable, and immobile. When fear becomes the main decision maker, growth slows, then stops entirely. Fear-based decisions don't usually look dramatic, they look reasonable. You stay where you are because it's stable. You don't speak up because it might cause conflict. You don't try because you might fail. Each choice makes sense on its own, but together they build a life of postponement. You tell yourself you'll act when you feel more confident, more prepared, more certain. But confidence doesn't come before action, it comes after. Waiting for fear to disappear before moving forward is like waiting for the ocean to be calm. Before learning to swim. One of the most paralyzing fears is the fear of failure. Not failure itself, but what failure might say about you. You imagine embarrassment, judgment, disappointment, yours and others. So you avoid situations where failure is possible. not realizing that avoidance guarantees a different kind of failure, the failure to grow. Every meaningful change carries risk. A life without risk may feel safe, but it slowly becomes suffocating. Nothing expands there, not skills, not self-trust, not identity. Fear of rejection works in a similar way. It convinces you to edit yourself, to soften your truth, to choose acceptance over authenticity. You become agreeable, adaptable, invisible. On the surface, it keeps relationships intact, but underneath, it creates distance from others and from yourself. When you live to avoid rejection, you never feel truly chosen because the version of you being accepted isn't fully real. Fear-based belonging always comes at the cost of self-respect. There is also the fear of change itself. Even when a situation is painful, it is familiar. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. This is why people stay in roles, relationships, and routines that drain them. They know the discomfort well. They've learned how to manage it. Change, on the other hand, requires stepping into uncertainty, and uncertainty triggers fear. But staying still doesn't stop time. It only guarantees that the cost of change will be higher later. Fear narrows perception. When you are afraid, you see fewer options. You focus on worst-case scenarios and overlook opportunities. You underestimate your resilience and overestimate the consequences of mistakes. This distorted vision keeps you from making bold but reasonable moves. It convinces you that you're not ready, not capable, not strong enough, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Fear speaks in absolutes, and when you believe it, you stop experimenting with your own potential. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to act without obeying it. Courage is quiet. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels uncomfortable, uncertain, and vulnerable. But every time you act despite fear, you weaken its authority. You show yourself that discomfort is survivable, that mistakes are informative, and that rejection is not fatal. This builds something far more valuable than confidence, self-trust. When fear no longer runs your decisions, life opens up. You still assess risks, but you don't let them define you. You choose growth over comfort, expression over silence, movement over paralysis. You stop asking, what if it goes wrong? And start asking, what if staying here costs me more? This shift doesn't eliminate fear, but it puts it in its proper place as information, not instruction. A life guided by fear stays intact but unchanged. A life guided by conscious courage evolves. If you want your life to move forward, you must stop letting fear decide for you and start choosing growth even when your hands are shaking. There comes a point in life when waiting for permission becomes more exhausting than taking responsibility. You've gathered advice, listened to opinions, learned from experiences, and observed the outcomes of others. Yet something still feels incomplete, not because you lack information, but because you haven't fully trusted yourself to decide. This is where self-trust becomes essential, not as arrogance or certainty, but as a quiet commitment to stand by your own choices. Many people confuse self-trust with confidence. Confidence is visible. It shows in posture, tone, and action. Self-trust is internal. It is the belief that even if you make a mistake, you will know how to respond. When you trust yourself, failure loses its power to define you. You stop demanding guarantees from life and start engaging with it as it is, uncertain, complex, and still worth choosing. Self-trust grows through action, not contemplation. The more you delay decisions, waiting for perfect clarity or external validation, the weaker your trust becomes. Each postponed choice reinforces doubt. You begin to rely on others to confirm what you already feel, and over time your inner voice becomes quieter. This dependency on reassurance doesn't make decisions safer, it makes them slower and less authentic. Choosing consciously means acting in alignment with your values rather than your impulses or fears. It requires awareness of your motives, your emotions, and your limits. Conscious choice is not reactive. It doesn't come from urgency or pressure. It comes from presence. When you are present, you can feel when something resonates and when it doesn't. You don't need to justify every decision to the world. You only need to justify it to yourself. One of the greatest barriers to conscious choice is the fear of being wrong. But being wrong is not the same as being irresponsible. Life is not a test you pass by avoiding mistakes. It is a process you navigate by learning from them. Every decision teaches you something about who you are and what you need. When you trust yourself, you stop seeing mistakes as evidence of inadequacy and start seeing them as data for growth. Self-trust also requires accepting the consequences of your choices without resentment. When you choose deliberately, you take ownership of the outcome, even when it's uncomfortable. This ownership is empowering. It frees you from victimhood. You no longer blame circumstances, people, or timing for where you are. You understand that while not everything is controllable, your response always is. There is a noticeable shift that happens when someone begins to trust themselves. They stop over-explaining. They stop apologizing for reasonable boundaries. They stop seeking approval for decisions that align with their values. Their energy becomes grounded. Others may not always agree with their choices, but they sense the integrity behind them. This integrity creates respect, both internally and externally. Conscious choice doesn't mean rigidity. It allows for flexibility, adjustment, and reflection. Trusting yourself doesn't lock you into a single path. It gives you the confidence to change direction when needed. You are not betraying yourself by evolving. You are honoring your capacity to adapt. The difference is that the choice to change comes from awareness, not panic. Breakthroughs rarely arrive as sudden transformations. They are the result of many small, deliberate decisions made consistently over time. Each conscious choice strengthens self-trust. Each act of self-trust makes the next choice easier. This is how momentum builds, not through motivation but through alignment. When your actions reflect your values, progress feels natural rather than forced. If you want a real breakthrough, stop waiting to feel ready and start choosing with awareness, because the life you want is built the moment you decide to trust yourself.